Okay, so the first part being, let the first part's review. Okay. Yeah, so again, the basics, JSX. So JSX is like a form of HTML that we use in a JavaScript file. It's really the foundation of ReactJS because it allows us to manipulate HTML elements and give it like a JavaScript interaction. So yeah, it's really useful, and it's really the basis of everything we are making here. Excuse me. And some basic ReactJS stuff. Props are basically like parameters, the arguments you pass into components from your main JavaScript file, which is usually your app.js file. And state variables, they're kind of like local variables. You define them within the component, and then you use the values inside the component. They can't be taken outside. And if you want to have a event handler interaction inside the component, like an on-click or something, then you have to bind. Then you have to bind this for the function. So if you're saying on-click, if on-click a button, some function happens, then you have to bind that function using a callback binder. And the last lesson, APIs and ReactJS. So yeah, React components have life cycles. So when they're unmounted, before they're destroyed and before they're updated and stuff. And we can use these life cycles to basically monitor how the process is going, or tell the program to ensure that a certain action happens only in a certain process, a certain step of the process. And yeah, APIs, we use them all the time, all over the web. And this is actually, the lesson today is actually going to be about an API, the API for Firebase. And functional components, they're basically like normal components, except they are functions. So you're able to pass in props and stuff, but you can't have event handlers or state variables and stuff. And using promises, so promise is basically like, you put it at the end of a function. You're basically saying, so if this happens, then something else must also happen. You're promising that it should happen. So if you're doing success callbacks, then that should be handled by .then. If you're doing failure callbacks, then that should be handled by .catch. And we've used that in the past lesson, and we'll also be using this in a bit. And lastly, the types of functions. We covered this the last time. So we have named functions, which are like normal functions, anonymous functions, we don't have any name, and arrow functions, kind of like lambda functions in Python. Okay, so now that that's all covered and out, let's move on to the meat of the stuff, databases. So what exactly is a database? So database is basically like a central location where we store a whole bunch of data. So we think it's really convenient because it allows a whole bunch of users to add on to it from multiple different nodes. And you have one central location where it's been stored. So you can have someone add on to it and someone else collect from the updated data. And it just makes it really convenient and stuff. So yeah, it's highly popular. Our whole civilization depends on it and all that stuff. Yada, yada. So yeah, SQL's been like the standard database programming language for a long time. SQL, MySQL, and all the varieties. And yeah, it uses a table approach where you divide the databases into columns, which represent your fields, I guess, sort of like an Excel, basically, and tables and columns. That's basically the basis of SQL. But yeah, there are, as you can read, some disadvantages to using SQL. Like, again, you have to store it in a rigid table. You have to say, okay, so all of this field is going to be here. I've got to have these many rows. I've got to have these many columns. And if you're misusing space, well, that's memory lost right there. And it sucks for you. That's the end of the day. And yeah, it can be slow for some web applications and make it harder to distribute, which kind of translates to more expensive. And at the end of the day, you want to save money. So yeah. So yeah, to meet those problems, we had NoSQL databases. So no standard way of storing data. And the advantage being that it's fast and easy to develop, easy to scale. Basically, it's all more developed. So a less skilled user can go in and set it up and work with it. So that's really a big advantage. So the NoSQL database we're going to be using this time around is called Firebase Realtime Database. It's easy to use and set up, and most importantly, it's free. So that makes everybody happy, I guess. And we'll be working with that. So let's introduce Firebase. So what exactly is Firebase? It's a system that Google's used for prototyping and development of small applications. And as I mentioned earlier, it's free, so it's really convenient. It's part of a package that Google puts out for like a bunch of small developers, say like chaps who are getting started with their journey, sort of. It's really advantageous for chaps like us. And yeah, it's got a lot of useful features, but we'll be using the real-time database. And yeah, so we'll be discussing this more towards the end, but you're going to have to use that on your intermediate final project. So what exactly is a real-time database? So the real-time database basically stores up JSON structure. It's got a key value pair. You've got to put in a key and you've got to have the value as it says. And because JSON, as the name implies, is particularly well paired to JavaScript, we really like what it's doing. So this is kind of what it looks like. Kind of like this. So you've got a JSON pair, and you've got the key, and you've got the key, and you've got the value, key and value, kind of like that. Yep. So yeah, let's start up with the first demo, how to set up a Firebase. So I've got one setup, but I'm putting in from an alternate account. So let's get started up with that. So the first step is going to be, oh dear, this is on the wrong internet. I mean the wrong account. And that's the right account. So first things first, you're going to have a Google account, of course. And once you've done that, you need to hit you're logged in and stuff, of course. Once you've done that, you need to hit the go to console. We hit to create a project. And you put in project name. So I'm going to do soft sat 22.
Are we going to create listed projects? Like if we had like one just for lesson 7 and we had one for the final projects, we would do that on one account?
Yeah. I mean, let me just show you. I've got this account set up already. So if I go out of project overview, I can go to see all projects. And yes, I've got like a whole bunch of projects. These are from previous years. So yeah, you can put it in anytime. Oh, never mind. Yep. Accept the terms and you hit continue. And when you're here, we don't want Google Analytics for this project. And once you're done with that, you say create project. Of course, this takes a couple of minutes, or it could go in a couple of seconds. Really depends on your computer. Right. So we're heading off to the project settings here. Just give me a sec. Yeah, no. This is where you'll find your, give it a nickname. Let's see. Spring. Oh, I'm not typing. Wrong keyboard. You put register up. You say use npm because that's what we're using. And you'll get this code over here. You want to copy this, especially this part here. So in our first demo in GitHub, if you go back down to GitHub over here, you'll see that we got a template, and you want to paste that part, the stuff inside the const Firebase config function right in here. That's like key to your individual project. And that's pretty important, yeah. And you say continue to console. Pretty good, okay. Analytics. Then you hit real-time database. Go with create database. Yep. And we want to start in test mode right now, but just a cautionary thing, it's not really secure. Anybody can access it. So if you're actually storing any data here, you really don't want to be in test mode. So just for display purposes and because it's easier, I'm heading off in test mode. So we enable that. And I've got me a database here. So again, we need to, once we've done this, we can plug in a JSON. So we got a data JSON in the GitHub folder I showed you before. Right back. This data.json file. So it's got all this stuff here for you. And all you have to do is go down here, click on import JSON, browse. And import. And voila. That's all there is to it. So let's switch back to the slides. And give ourselves 10 minutes. Let's say 10 minutes and get ourselves some Firebase set up properly in our computers. So if you're having any doubts or if something's not working properly or anything like that, feel free to call us up. We can get this initial issues resolved, and if we got it successfully done, we can move on to the next step. So yeah, let's do 10 minutes.
I'm actually having trouble with my Git. It says, please commit your changes or staff some requests to branches.
Could you take it? Yeah. I'll do that. Okay, so let's start moving on them. And okay, let's start on with the JavaScript bit. So how exactly are we going to be manipulating the database from within our JavaScript files? So first things first, we're going to have two functions. We're going to have two namespaces from which we're going to be importing all our functions. So that's going to be Firebase app and Firebase database. You're going to see the input for both of these in your database.js file. So You should see that just a sec. Yep, so this is what your database.js is going to look like. So you're going to be importing initialize app from Firebase app, and you're going to be importing get database from Firebase database. So app is basically where all the core setup stuff happens. So initialize app basically sets everything up and sends the connection up, while Firebase database is where all the interactions dealing with the database actually exists, sort of. And yeah, so here's the paste config stuff. That's where the stuff I told you to copy paste. That's where you paste that stuff there. And yeah, once that's done, you basically initialize app and get database app and export database, because we'll be using that in the other components. And yeah, before you start everything, though, it's really advisable to get this in. So go into your folder, whatever your folder name is, and hit an npm install Firebase. You'll do a thorough checkup, and yeah, it's really convenient. So So yeah, to have proper web development practices in this regard, we're going to have to follow 4 key principles, like 4 key actions that we have to include in our program. And that's basically, the acronym for that is basically CRUD. So that stands for create and store data. So that's the first thing we want. The second is read available data. The third is update existing data. And the fourth is delete existing data. So we want all 4 actions to be possible within our program. That's literally the purpose of a database program. So if you can't do all of these, it's like the database isn't actually working. Like you can just go directly to go directly up here and manipulate it. You don't really need to touch your JavaScript if you can't get all functionality. Yep. So yeah, all of our data actions need a reference, because the reference basically points to the location in the JSON file. Oh, sorry, the location in the JSON file, which refers to where the object that you're pointing to exists. So it's like a key basically. And yeah, so for every function that is used to make these actions happen, we need the references. So if you're looking at something like this, I'll just I'll show you what's happening in the Firebase tool. So if you're looking at Spring 2022, that's like basically this, right? And if you say, oh goodness, if you say Spring 2022/final, so you're just going one in and you're referring to now this value, Pokédex app. So that's basically what's happening when you're putting it like this. So moving on to the first action, creating data in Firebase. So after you import that Firebase/database, which is where you get your actions from, you need to import set from database. So set basically takes 2 parameters. The first is the reference, and the second is the data to store at the reference. So the reference basically points to the location where you want to create the data, and the second parameter is basically like what exactly do you want at that location. So an example of what that looked like is basically this in demo 2. Just a sec. Demo 2. So yeah, here we're basically creating a key value pair, and we're basically saying, okay, so we got set, and you're putting in your data ref, you're putting in the reference to the location, and you're putting in your data. And then, as I said before, you're using promises here. You say, yep, if it succeeds, if it goes in, then you say, okay, set was successful. And if it fails, then you say that it failed, and you log an error in your console. Moving on to the second action. Reading your data in the Firebase. So you use the onValue method for that. You import it from Firebase/database. And onValue basically takes two parameters. The first is again the reference. So the reference is again basically indicating the location of the value that you're reading. And the second is a callback function, which basically loops through the data. And after every data run is done, it looks at the updates and it's like, okay, so this is the data we have. So take it out and store it inside whatever mechanism we have here, sort of like that. So if you want to take a look at it in the demo file, so again, we have the data ref, and then the second parameter is a function here. So this function, it basically cycles through a whole bunch of keys and it prints out the values that are seen within the keys. And then, yeah, prints out basically like a dotted line to show demarcation. So that's what a read data function looks like. Yes, updating, that's the third action now. So for updating, we basically use the update method, which is again imported from Firebase database like the rest. And it takes two parameters. It takes the reference of the object that you're updating and the data that you're going to insert in that location. So it's kind of like set in that manner, like the structure and stuff. So again, let's take a look at what that looks like in demo 2. Update data. So again, you have the pair here. You're like, this is what the new value is going to look like. And you've got the data ref here. And you basically say, okay, update, this is the reference, and this is what the data should be. And then you again put in conditions for success and failure. So again, really similar to creating a new data, except the location, the reference location is going to be something that already exists. And you're just replacing that with a new data value. And lastly, deleting data. So, sorry. So so deleting data is basically uses the remove method. So the remove method is really simple. All you need to do is give this one parameter, which is just the location of the value that you want removed. So just the reference, and that's it. So this is what it looks like here. So delete data function, you just say, okay, so this is the reference, and then you say remove that reference, end of the story. And then you give it the success promise, the failure promise. Again, as I mentioned before, if you look at the top, you'll find that we're importing all these methods from Firebase/database. So yeah, that's pretty important right there. Oh, yeah, as I mentioned before, this is a pretty, sorry. Yeah, so this is a pretty important distinction. The set and update functions and their application looks really similar, but set basically destroys all the data at the location there and creates an entirely new data block. While update only updates the value there. It doesn't really affect the existing block over there. See, that's a really important distinction to make. Now again, demo program 2, let me just show you the results of that. So, I mean, let me just walk you through the whole thing. So you go to app, you're basically like, okay, so I'm running demo 2 over here. I'm importing demo 2, so all of that is cool. And you've got database.js. So as you see, I'm importing initialize app and get that database and initializing both of those methods. And yeah, I've got all these details posted here. So this is what connects my JavaScript programs, the whole folder here, to my Firebase. So it's going to look different for all of you. obviously. And yeah, moving on to demo 2. So move this up. So then you again import database from database.js and import the methods that you're going to be using. And because all of that is going to be accomplished by button clicks, as you see down here, we're going to be using JSX to actually construct the HTML elements. And so we're going to be making 4 buttons down here. And since we're using onClicks to make the actions happen, we need to use callback binders to bind the function. So we do that up here. And then we write the functions themselves. Like I told you before, you use the set function, the reference, and the data, the on-value functions, the reference, and the function to cycle through the database and post it out to console.log. And the update function, again, the reference and the data, and the delete function, just the reference, the remove function, sorry, just the reference, and that's it. And then you just do the standard JSX stuff, and that's that. So let's see it happen. Oh, hot damn, sorry. Wrong keyboard. So yeah, the console is going to be important because that's where we're printing all this stuff out. So let's see that. Tools. Yes, that's a console there. Nothing up there right now. You read data, and you've got everything from the JSON. You create data, and you have the successful key up here, so you know it was good. Update data. Again, well, I'm not actually putting in any input, so you got all these lines up here, but it says it's successful, so we know the process went through at least. The database, oh yeah, of course. Just a sec. Run, please again. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that's basically what we had in create data, like at the very top, if you'll remember, in the demo 2 function. Key value, another key other value. So yeah, just put that in here. And the last one, of course, delete data. And as you'll see, the added is gone, and I guess a couple more got pruned off. So yeah, that's how it basically works at the end of the day. Any questions about the operations, the functions themselves, or anything like that? Yep.
The on value function, so that just like whenever that data reference is changed, the value of the data reference is changed, it calls the function to be present for that. Or
Yes, so I mean, let me pull up the function up here. Yeah, so the starting data reference is not going to change, right? So basically, let me. I beg your pardon? Yeah. Useful. Does this come from an extension? Okay, nice. Yeah,
So
pretty.
does it always run that callback function, or is it like a one-time thing?
Now the function itself is a for loop, so the on value is a one-time thing, but the function is a loop. So once that loop's done, then the on value function's done.
Like it's saying, it's called once when first and again every time.
Yep.
You have to do something to like stop it.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Yep. Any other questions?
Oh, so you're like in that.
Yeah. The online.
Yep.
Very comfortable online and
Anything from the online area? No? Oh, pretty good then. Let's get.
Start is not working. Actually,
I had to rename a couple of components.
Did you were the demo?
Yeah, there's no.
Did you have to make them capitalized?
yeah, I mean, I've done some, okay, so you gotta do it.
Yeah, like before these were capitalized, and then you use them.
Yeah, all of the demo stuff is supposed to be the D is supposed to be capitalized. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so I'll just control this. Yes, everything's working. Okay, cool. Let's keep going then. All right, so slideshow. All right, so we're going to be discussing two of the functions that we saw last time from the component lifecycle. So the first is React has a component didMount function that will only run when the component is completely loaded. So we put the database read up here. So the theory is basically like, yeah, if the component's fully loaded, then we can start reading the database. Pretty simple like that. So I'll just face on to demo 3 and show you what that looks like here. Demo 3. So you have the component didMount function before you do the render, of course, and you use the on value here, and you read the data like the same way you used in the read value function, and that's about the end of it. But after you're done with that, oh sure. You also have to deactivate the on value function, because if not, it'll keep. Sorry, let's just slideshow command. Yep, you got to make sure to deactivate the on value callback before you're leaving the page. If not, it'll keep going on again and again and again, and you don't really want that. So if you'll remember from previous lessons, you've got a component will unmount function. So that runs right before you unload the page. You want to put the deactivation of the on value function over there. So again, let me phase through to demo 3 real quick and show you what that looks like. So you have the component will unmount, and yeah, you reference the dot. Sorry, you just reference the reference, and you say off, which basically detaches the previous on value callback function. and you point to the reference that you used on the onValue function, and that's it, end of the story. So yeah, that's basically what demo 3 was. I mean, the next slide is basically demo 3, so I'll just show you what that looks like. Let me seal this up. Yep. Check the console. See the readings. Just a sec. I beg thy pardon. Sorry about that. Yep, so F12. And yep, printed your stuff here. So yeah, that's demo 3 for you folks. And that's whether it's standard. We can move on to the checkpoint for today's project. In today's session, sort of. So we basically want you to use Firebase and use JavaScript to display the contents of the example data using a React component. So the stuff in the data.json file. So we want you to add a bunch of buttons and text boxes to display the example data, and the buttons should have functionality to be able to add or remove data from the example data. So yeah, that's basically a checkpoint right there. So if you've got any doubts about it, like give yourself all the time you need and test it out. If you've got any doubts or if something's not working, then feel free to call up. Yep.